it's been very exciting to be part of, leading the revolution of what's going on in that craft malting space. Just so you know, this is the most awarded craft malt house in the world.
And that is such a beautiful place to start.
It's pretty cool.
Why don't you go ahead and say hello to our viewership, let them know who you are, and then maybe get into a little bit of that Genesis story that we were talking about.
Okay. My name is Mike Meyers. I came on at the very beginning once they started to get a foothold and started to sell some malt here, and basically stepped in to help run the full operations, which goes all the way from delivering grain to cleaning the vessels to packaging to making the grain. So I've been here from the beginning pretty much, which has been pretty exciting to see.
Heck yeah. Oh my gosh. Anything from the ground up, I feel like
Yep.
is always worth it. Give us a little bit then a background. I know why I'm excited to be here. I feel like you've kind of gotten that hint. You're the most awarded.
Yep. The most
into that a little
awarded
more.
craft malt house in the world. We've been recognized 11 times for the quality of grain coming out of this facility. Through the Craft Malt Guild, they host a competition yearly, and we've been recognized 11 times, but every single year that they've had the competition. So it's been very exciting to be part of, leading the revolution of what's going on in that craft malting space.
Okay, I think that's a really good segue into what does that mean to be leading the market?
We want to provide high quality grain to the brewers and distillers, and we saw a void in the marketplace.
Okay, so the Olander family has been farming for a really long time. Really long time. They're a fifth generation family farm, so you start to wonder, how does a fifth generation family farm become the most awarded craft malt house in the world in a decade?
In the world?
In the
Wow.
world. Yeah.
That's bonkers.
Yeah. Well, the secret is in their tagline, actually. It comes down to 3 simple words: sow, grow, deliver. There's a lot of meaning behind those 3 simple words.
Yeah.
Seemingly simple.
Yeah, and they live up to them.
Todd and his parents were visiting New Belgium and a couple other regional specific breweries, and they were talking to the brewers, and the conversation went something like, where are you getting your grains from? And a lot of them were getting them imported from Europe.
Yep.
And the family has been on this plot of land for almost 100 years. We hit our 100-year mark in just a couple years for the farm, the century mark, which is pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
But during that 100 years, we've grown barley for Anheuser-Busch and Coors for about 50 of those years. So we were growing high quality barley for some of the biggest producers of beer in the world, or at least in America, at least. And so there was just this, disconnect. Well, the family thought, well, we can grow high quality barley, maybe we can malt it, and there's no local provider for any of those malted materials to the brewing industry. And if you think about it, Fort Collins at that time is, and it still is, considered the mecca of beer. So there was just this giant void of a local producer, and the family thought, hey, this is a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
Let's move forward. And through some of those conversations with those original breweries, the feedback that they gave us was that if the product wasn't good and if it wasn't consistent, then they just weren't interested in it. And so that led a lot of the thinking from the family of how to build this operation.
Okay.
So we looked at a bunch of malting equipment, and Todd flew to Germany, Todd and his dad, to look at some of this equipment that we now operate on. And at that time, it was, our equipment is considered the Cadillac for craft malting.
What year did that start kind of taking place?
Geez, maybe like 2015, maybe even earlier. Is when those original conversations happened. So, it took us a while to source the equipment, to find out what we were really going to do, to build the building, to do all those things. So the groundwork was years before that, and just thinking about it and observing what was going on in our backyard in the brewing industry.
So you're talking about over the realm of the last decade, and and here you are, and still no one. Troubadours started, so they came after, right? So you started.
Colorado
and now
Malting
still
is the
continue.
original Colorado. I would credit them with being the first craft maltster maybe in America. So those guys truly in Alamosa are leading the way.
Yeah.
They set all the footprints, you know, they led the way, but we came after those guys, and I'm not clear on the timing of Troubadour, but we're pretty close to those guys. So.
Okay. Very cool. Oh my gosh. I can imagine like being like, okay, we've grown this for 50 years, you said?
Yeah.
Barley for Anheuser-Busch and then...
Coors, yeah.
Wow, and Coors.
Yeah. Originally, the farm was built to do custom harvesting. That's what we were doing. Right. So we actually purchased like the large format tractors to help other farmers around us. And that's how we kind of like got into that custom farming, custom harvesting program. And then we've since shifted a little bit of that. You know, I think the family saw an opportunity to start filtering some of the small grains through the malt house to start relieving it instead of moving those items into like the commodity market where the value of it is completely unpredictable. So corn could be really high one year and really low the next year. And, you know, you're kind of at the mercy of what's going on in that commodity market that you have no control over, right? And so that's kind of the idea of the malt, having the farm. So this operation will always be a farm first. We're a family farm, 100 years, we farm stuff.
Awesome.
And then we filter all the small grains that we're growing through this operation that we're then relieving out in the marketplace into the breweries and distilleries everywhere.
So farm and filter.
Farm, malt house.
Farm.
So we sow, we grow, and we deliver. That's kind of our tagline.
Love that.
Okay. So you really can't deny the amount of passion that is literally just oozing from this farm. You also can't deny the quality of the malt this family is producing, right? Look at all the medals, look at all the awards, look at all the recognition. I guarantee, at least I'd be willing to place some money on it, if you've had a beer in the state of Colorado, you've probably had a beer with malt that comes from this farm.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, and this farm must be huge, right? They have to own so much land to be helping out and hitting up so many local breweries, to be the malt people for Coors, for AB InBev for the last 50 years. And like I said, all of the new local craft beer that boomed up over the last decade.
Right, you would think so.
Yeah,
right.
You would think
so. But the truth is they only own actually a couple of hundred of acres. But they actually farm over 2,000 acres.
Wow.
So it actually puts them in this really vulnerable position, if you start to think about it, at being at the will of people selling out their farmland to developers. And to each their own, you got to do what you got to do, because to sell out to them, it's a much more lucrative position to be in than to be a farmer, right? It's not this ideal state of being to be a farmer, right? Like, it's really hard work.
Yeah.
So
if you're lucky enough to have land, then...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So good for you.
Yeah.
So it really has us questioning the support of this type of quality of life is really where we're at. And Mike and the crew at Root Shoot are definitely like spreading the word about preserving the farmland.
Spreading the love.
Spreading the love.
So the family, right now we own about 200 acres here in northern Colorado.
Okay.
But we're farming and leasing about 2,000. So it fluctuates every year a little bit on the acreage that we're able to secure for the farm. And on the farm, we're growing barley, a couple varieties of wheat, rye, oats, alfalfa, and then corn for the distilleries. So we have quite a few things in the ground located here in northern Colorado. And we're not all centrally located here at this space on the farm. We're kind of spread out all over Berthoud and Loveland.
Okay.
And a lot of that, it just has to do with, you know, where we own the property and then where we're leasing the property as well. And I'm sure that you saw the Buc-ee's coming up. That used to be our farmland. So that was a leased. Well,
it was leased.
It was leased property, and so when Buc-ee's decided to build their facility, they pulled the lease on that farmland for us. And at one time, that was the most productive farmland for this operation, which is, you know, that's where it becomes almost a pinch point for the farm and us. Is since we don't own that land, we're kind of at the mercy
I
of what's
understand.
going on. Northern Colorado is a very desirable place to live,
Yeah.
and so the price of land and securing any of that is almost unachievable for us. So we have to figure out ways to do better with what we have and still maintaining our balance every year of farmland. So,
I think you could probably but talk a little bit to the 100-year. Is it the 100-year plan?
the 100-year lease.
Lease, okay. And how maybe, I was going to save that for the end, but talk a little bit to the 100-year lease and what people can do to help support that so we don't hear more of these stories coming up.
So farming is not a very lucrative position. People are not standing up, waving their hands, saying, I want to be a farmer, right? It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of long days. It's a lot of planning. And it's just not as lucrative as some other things. So there are families in this area that have been farming it for a long time that are now stepping away from the farms, and their children are not farming it any longer. So it becomes more lucrative to sell their land to developers than it is to farm it. We've partnered with Colorado Open Lands to help secure some of that land and put it into conservation easements, so that way it can remain in farm land forever. It cannot be developed. So we've started moving our own farms that way and talking to some of the farmers around us that we're also farming their land to help them, or at least to introduce them to these ideas of, hey, well, we want to maintain some of our food integrity or food sources, and we want to just make sure that this is going to stay farmland forever. So that's kind of the idea of the 100-year lease, is to try to bring some, just some more thought, more eyes onto it, talk about it a little bit on how farmland is disappearing and very viable farmland around here. And if you own that, like I said, it's more lucrative to sell it, right?
Easy money,
right?
I guess. So what can our viewers do to help support that if they're interested?
I mean, Colorado
anybody?
Open Lands is an organization that they can reach out to. We have some resources on our website that kind of explain what's going on there. We're starting to have these conversations about what we're going to do to mark our 100 years as a farm. So we're talking about maybe releasing a single barrel of whiskey that's, picked by the team that's the best, and maybe some of that funds goes back to the open lands, or malting something very unique where we're giving back some of that just to help, raise attention to it.
So there's this way of life and this quality of life that goes into the Root Shoot ethos. Gotta admire it, man. I freaking love it. And it's this product of malt that's getting put out there, right? So what we're going to learn next is that germination and the steeping process of malting, right? Root Shoot has a steep tank and 3 drums that they use to turn out the malt product. Huge,
yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, we're actually going to go through the next steps and the steps of germination, and like how that all goes, how that all works, right?
Yeah, and it's going to be the beginning stages of it, right? It's not only the germination process, but how they use hot steeping for quality assurance, quality control, that they're putting out this good product.
All right.
So it takes us 7 days to go from raw barley or raw wheat or raw rye, whatever the product is. It takes us 7 days to go from start to a finished product.
Wow. And how much are you doing? Every 7 days?
So we have 3 drums, and we're generally turning them over every 2 days. So one comes out Monday, one comes out Wednesday, one comes out Friday, and then we just rinse and repeat the next week.
Wow.
That's the goal.
Yeah, for sure.
But we're running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Generally, we're only shutting her down for like Christmas and Thanksgiving and stuff like that. So.
All right, Mike, talk to me about what we got going on here. I see a 1, I see a 2, I see a 3. I see some different stages of what we're looking at here.
Okay, so basically these are just samples from each one of the drums. So drum 1, 2, and 3, which you'll get to see a little bit later. But what we have is basically our pale ale that we make, Genie Pale, and it's in 3 different stages. So drum 1 is, it is the furthest along in germination here.
Okay.
And so you see a lot of rootlet growth in there. It's really soft. You can squeeze it in your hand. There's something interesting. I don't know if we're quite there yet, But if you take a kernel and you smear it in your finger, and it leaves this paste-like material, then it's about ready to go to malting or go to kilning. So this is a technical term. It's called malter's thumb. But that's how they've determined when barley is ready to go to kiln for ages. So basically, you just want to make sure all those starches are made in the inside of that kernel. So this one's the furthest along, and it will go to kiln tomorrow. So we'll start drying it out. And then drum 2 transferred over on Wednesday, so it's a little earlier in the process of germination. So the grain's still soaking in some of the moisture. We're still applying water to it to get it to its target moisture level. But you see like the rootlets on there are really bright and white, and it's starting those beginning stages of starting to sprout.
Okay.
And then drum 3, which just emptied today, actually has finished product in it. So this will move over to our packaging side. It has already today, but this is basically a finished product here. So you're dry at like 3%, and then it just needs to be cleaned and put into bags, and then it can be delivered to the breweries.
Okay.
And so to accompany the finished product, we have what's called a hot steep. So the American Society of Brewing Chemists came up with an evaluation method to test finished malt. So this is the liquid format of this.
Okay.
So basically you're just making a little mini mash in a thermos, and you're holding it for about 15 minutes at 149 degrees. And you're just emulating that mash profile. Then you filter it through this, and what you get is the actual liquid of what this is. So this is really, we're basically just making a tea out of the grains.
Right.
And so we do this for just product evaluation. So we're making sure that it's, if we're making a Pilsner malt, that it's nice and light in color.
Yeah.
If we're making a Munich malt, we want to make sure that color is right. But this is Genie Pale, and so our target is between 2 and 3 on the color range, and
Yep.
this batch came out at 2.8, so we're right in the threshold there.
Beautiful.
But it's really nice, beautiful golden color. Should have all the toasty profile that Genie Pale is pretty much known for.
What the heck is Genie Pale? I keep seeing Genie Pale. What is that? And what does that grain have to do with community and collaboration to its finest?
And also they're operating in Colorado, like just Colorado, or I want to do mine again. I didn't like it. Also, are they and so are they just operating in Colorado, or can get the Genie Pale elsewhere?
Is Genie Pale your most popular?
So Genie Pale consists of not quite 50% of what is leaving this facility. So it is our fastest moving grain. Genie Pale has a very interesting genesis story. So Station 26 is one of our original partners.
Awesome.
Starting from scratch here. They were very interested in what we were doing. So at that time, Todd would make a batch of Genie Pale, and we would deliver it to Station, and they would brew with it, and then they would give us feedback on it.
Okay.
And so Todd would make some changes in whatever it was, the kilning, germination profile, whatever their feedback was, and then we would remake it, re-deliver it. They would brew with it,
Wow.
give us the feedback, and we just tweaked it until one day they were like, yes,
That's it.
that's what we want. It's also won, I think, 4 craft malting medals.
Very cool. And how many breweries are you reaching out to? Like how?
So we fluctuate a little bit, somewhere between like 125 to 135 breweries, or just like in and out.
Colorado
just here in the state of
specifically?
Colorado.
Okay.
And then we have about a dozen distilleries that we work with as well.
Wow.
So we do ship some stuff out of state. It's very low amount. The density of breweries and operations here in Colorado is so much bigger than everywhere else.
For sure.
Right? So we're just, we're a small team doing this, and so reaching outside of our own state is just a challenge. So we've kept it in state for the most part.
Sure.
We did our first international shipment last year. We sent a couple pallets down to Honduras to a brewery there, which was super exciting, pretty cool.
Do you hand deliver it?
No, I wish. I tried to get that worked into the schedule. It just didn't happen.
Okay, so things are about to get really exciting because now we're going to step into the wild, wild wonder of the world of the malting facility itself.
And this facility was absolutely incredible. The machinery is huge. It was loud. It was clean. The sheer size of this was kind of hard to even fathom.
It's wild. It's wild. So, like you said, there's 3 drums inside. Each drum weighs about 36,000 pounds. And then on top of that, they put 20,000 pounds of product into it. That doesn't even account for the water weight. Just think of like the size of the thing. So you're going to see it. It's so exciting. And so the tour itself is going to take us from start to finish of this malting process, from steep to germination to kiln to roast, right? All those different steps, all driven by 3 magical elements, and they are time, temperature, and moisture.
Such an incredible tour and experience, the whole thing. Like, had no idea what to expect going in, and it blew me away.
Oh yeah.
All right, here we are in Prime Central Station. Talk to me. What's going on?
So what you're looking at here are drums 1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, 3.
And then the steep tank, which is another piece of equipment. So this is a conical shape, very similar to what you see in breweries. It has a little bit of a different function. So how the malting process begins is we load our steep tank with 20,000 pounds of raw material. Once it's loaded, we fill it up with water to the top, and we start the soaking process of the grains inside of that vessel.
Okay.
It stays wet inside of there with the water for roughly, 4 hours or so, and then we drain out all the water. What happens is the material thinks that it's now time to grow. Like it's at a good temperature of the earth, like low 60s. So it thinks we're basically just tricking it into growing. Really.
Sure.
What happens is we start to generate a lot of heat inside of that vessel.
Sure.
So we go from low 60s to it starts to push up towards 90 degrees inside of there, just on its own energy that it's creating through that growing process.
Cool.
But once we've let it sit in there dry, we then hit it with water again and fill it all the way back up. We start to run some air through the bottom of the vessel. So what that does is it pushes the air up through the bottom, and it creates this boiling effect inside of that vessel. And it's not boiling, it's just moving, the air is just working its way up and moving.
Okay.
It's basically making sure that everything is very homogeneous inside of that vessel, that everything has access to the same water, and that we don't have dry spots in there. And putting a little bit of oxygen inside of that water for the barley or wheat or rye or whatever it is. So then we start watching the moisture content of the grains, and we are looking for about 40% for our operation before we move it over into one of the drums. So what we do is we start pulling samples, and we just wait till it hits about 40%, pull the trigger to move it out of the water into one of these vessels here, the drums.
Okay.
Now the drums itself are shaped, it's like a mash tun, it's like an elongated mash tun. So there's a false bottom that runs the length of the drum. When we transfer over all the water and the grain, all the water seeps through that false bottom and comes out a drain, and all the grain stays up on top of it.
Yeah.
You don't want to leave water on the grain in excess, because then you start to have molding and spoilage issues.
Sure.
So if you think of the drum, it's basically providing a controlled environment for us to germinate and grow whatever the material is. So the total process of steeping takes about a full day, 24 hours.
Okay. That was my question.
And it's very grain dependent as well. So not all barley or wheat or rye behaves the same inside of these same parameters, right? They're all a little different from each other. Like we used to malt a barley variety called Odyssey, and it was a very dense kernel that liked to be underwater compared to like Genie. Genie doesn't like that much water. So we shorten that time frame for Genie, but we elongate it for Odyssey. The drum allows us to control the exact temperature, the airflow, the air mixture, humidity, and then we can put water directly onto the grain bed inside of that vessel. So we are just making sure that we're providing the best opportunity for it to grow as consistent as possible. Because once you if you're not doing that, when you lose some of that consistency, you lose the consistency in the product downstream, right? So you just get inconsistent results. So the idea is to treat every kernel of that 2,000 pounds or 20,000 pounds the exact same, so that it has the exact same opportunity to grow at the same pace. So once we germinate for about 5 days, and then we turn on the heat and the air and start drying it out inside of that vessel. So applied heat, and what we do is to make different products, we change a couple of those parameters. Basically, we have 3 levers that we can change to make something different. Time, temperature, and moisture. And so if you change those in any one direction, you can get something different out. So if you want to make a Munich malt, like something that's darker, has a little bit more color, more flavor, you want high heat, high moisture, because it creates that browning effect on the grain. So like if you think about butter and toast, like that's the same concept in here.
So basically, temperature, moisture, darker grains?
Yep.
But they're all about on the same time length?
So when we start to run some of the darker malts, because the heat is so intense, we actually shorten that kilning cycle up a little bit. We make a distiller's malt, which is our lightest colored malt, and that's basically being air dried with very low applied heat, where we make like a honey malt, which is dark and very complex, and the time frame between those is probably like 12 hours of kiln time.
What's the temperature then?
So usually it's about 200, 225 on the honey malt, which is the darker, and then it's probably about 150 for the distillers. So what is that, 75 degrees of difference between the lightest to the darkest?
So yes, the equipment is totally bonkers, and if it isn't obvious, I am 100% smitten at this point in the process. And wildly, it gets better. I didn't know it was possible to melt in person live. Here we go. So we've learned 3 magical words.
Time, temperature, water.
And moisture. That's my bad. It should be moisture.
We'll do it again.
Yep, sorry.
Time, temperature, moisture.
You got it. But there's actually a 4th variable to this equation. Can you guess what it is?
Air Jordan.
Close. Less the half.
Air?
That's right.
Sir Airness?
And I tell you what, by this time I totally needed some air because it was so hot.
It was toasty.
It was
warm.
hot in there.
So what we're going to do is open up the bottom of drum 2, and what you're going to see is basically nothing. It's empty space in there. But you're going to be able to feel the airflow through there that then is seeping up through the grain bed. We're just opening a port for it to escape now. So it'll be kind of intense on the wind factor, because it's just trying to get through.
Sweet, I'm hot anyway.
So how the drum works is we take air from outside and we run it through a chiller to cool it to get it down to about 60 degrees. And then it's forcing its way into the vessel through the bottom, seeps up through the grain bed, and exhausts out the back. So
as it heats up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the byproduct of the malting process is heat and CO2. That's what's being generated inside of these vessels. So the idea is that and the beauty of our equipment is that if we want it to be 60 degrees inside of that vessel, it will self-regulate the temperature to hit that 60 degrees. So if it senses that the grain bed is starting to heat up and get a little bit out of control, it'll turn the fans on and run the air through the air, basically in a chiller, before it feeds in, and it'll start cooling itself down.
Is that what sets it apart then when you called it the Cadillac of systems?
Yes, it gives us a lot of control over all those processes. Basically, I mean, when you boil it down, some farmers that don't know how to malt, all the bells and whistles on how to do it the best to their abilities, right?
Yeah.
They were not leaving anything to chance. They wanted to figure it out. And this gave them the most opportunity to do something consistent.
And this is how they planned it out, right? Like, we built it this big because we were putting 3 drums in, we were putting the 1 steep in. This is how it was going to be.
So that's where this operation is optimized at. So we have 1 burner and 1 steep tank, and both of those can power all 3 drums.
Wow.
If you wanted to add a 4th, you would have to go to 6, because that's where it's optimized at, right?
Yeah.
So, but what's really interesting is you can't cross streams with processes in here. So I can't kiln 2 drums at once, and I can't steep 2 batches. So you have to be very regimented in your processes on how you're achieving getting product from A to B.
That's the OCD dream right there.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love it.
Yeah, okay. All right, I see you. I see you. All right, let's take a look.
Okay.
Did you hear that?
I can't hear much.
Oh, okay.
Come in a little closer.
Get in. I want to feel the full force of the wind. Did you get that? Oh, it feels so good.
So what you're looking at is the bottom of the drum, and that's just empty space in here. So the drum, it actually shaped and it gets a little skinnier towards the back end. And that allows all that water to filter down to a drain that's located at the back end.
Okay.
So that allows all the material to stay up top on that false bottom.
Very
So when we close this, all that air doesn't have anywhere to go but up through the grain bed and then exhaust out.
How big did you say the tanks are?
34,000 pounds empty, then we put in 20,000 pounds of material, but then we put the water weight on top of it, so it's heavy.
Cool. If you're warm, stand here, because it feels very nice.
Because it's been over 90 degrees the last few days, everything is happening faster. So a lot of the equipment is trying to cool everything down, right? So malting in the summer is different than malting in the winter. In the winter, everything is cold. So your groundwater is cold. The grain is cold from sitting outside. The atmosphere is cold outside.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is in the winter, we're just trying to keep everything warm and push it along and move it along. So it actually takes longer to malt in the winter because you're just like, come on, let's go, keep it warm. And in the summer, you're trying to suppress all that heat because you have the inverse problems.
Ah, he got me again. There's a 5th element to this process. Basically, we'll call this one the no clumping allowed. Think of how you dry out pumpkin seeds or adding milk to flour. What happens?
It starts to stick together.
Right. Did you notice those big ass chains around the machines?
It's the first thing I noticed.
Yeah. The machines turn. It makes sense, right? So movement is our 5th variable.
Yeah, makes sense, all right?
But this is what it looks like inside of the drums. So what you're seeing is the moisture coming out that's generally trapped in there. But you have the grain bed is maybe 3.5, 4 feet deep from basically here down to the temperature probe down there.
Okay.
So you have the false back on this, and that's where all that air is escaping out of this vessel.
So I see the auger. Are you stirring it as well?
So we're not, that's to help get it in and out.
Okay.
So what happens is when we pump it with water out of the steep tank, it'll collect, it comes through these pipes and it'll collect right here. And so we need space. So the auger turns on and runs to the back and helps move some of that product as it's piling up right here to create some room.
Okay.
So it takes about an hour to get all the material from out of the steep tank into the drums.
That's not bad.
No, not bad at all. So the drum itself, about every 11 hours, it rotates around. So if you're familiar with floor malting with people pulling the rake and they're basically mixing up the barley, the rotation of the drums is just the mechanical version of that turning. So we have to have a way to turn the barley or else it will grow together in a 20,000 pound clump inside of this drum.
If you recall, at the beginning, we mentioned the tagline, sow, grow, and deliver. Well, we're at the delivery portion of this part of the tour of Root Shoot. Well, the beginning of it anyway. So what we're going to learn is that Root Shoot functions off of one base malt, which ultimately they've mastered into 14 different products.
I mean, I love that they're the masters of it, but it feels a bit like they have all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah, and
that's nerve-wracking
yeah,
for me.
And that's basically Mike's words exactly. So what we start to get into is that, okay, so they've mastered this art, but what about mitigating risk? What about stepping outside of your boundaries to combat that? All eggs in said one basket.
This is the packaging, shipping side of the warehouse. So this is where all the finished malted material goes.
Okay.
So like I said, we're producing somewhere about 14 different varieties of malt.
Okay.
Whether that be rye, oats, wheat, but we're all producing it from one base barley, and that's Genie is the species of barley. Genie comes from a company called Lima Grain, and they're a European company, and they just happen to have an office in Windsor where they sell seed from. So it's certified seed that we're growing. And over the years of this operation, we've started with a dozen different varieties, and we've whittled it down every year to Genie, just one.
Cool.
And so, we're the masters at all these different phases, so it has to grow well out in the field, it has to malt well, and then it has to translate to the brewing and distilling side. And so as we've grown, we've eliminated things that haven't grown well,
Sure.
haven't malted well, haven't had a good reception in the marketplace. And
Sure.
we've really hung our hat on that Genie barley. And so we've also won a lot of awards with
Yeah.
that grain as well. So it's kind of hard to deviate away from it because it does so well for
Yeah.
us. Some of the things that we're looking into to kind of like move forward into the future is like to look at some of our raw materials. A couple years ago, we brought in some heritage grains that we started growing. We're looking at some winter barley, which is not normally something that's grown here in Colorado.
Okay.
So we're just trying to, a little bit of it is to mitigate some of the risk because we have all eggs in that basket, right? So we're just trying to, change the harvest times or the planting times a little bit to, try to starve off the hailstorms.
Right.
Every year it changes a little bit. This year our barley looks really good, really early.
Okay.
And so we're probably going to harvest earlier than we've ever harvested on the farm.
Are you harvesting in August?
So that's where we used to harvest.
Okay.
Now we're like into the last weeks of July. So it's just moving up every year. And it just, we're not really sure what to do. I mean, you can't fight climate change, right? All we could do is look at some of our practices and try to mitigate a little bit of that risk through that format.
Okay.
So, but as we're getting closer to that 100-year mark for our farm, now we're really talking about doing something different, like just either growing a heritage variety of barley from the Czech Republic and bring it in. We've been talking to Coors, like trying to get the very first Moravian that they planted here in Berthoud. Like, we're trying to think of some really cool stories, cool products, just try to create some diversity in our lineup. So
I guess I didn't think about that earlier when you said it started with Anheuser-Busch and Coors. So you're still growing for them while you're now doing this as well?
We have stopped growing for them,
Okay.
But we do sell our malt to Coors.
Okay.
In specific. So the Colorado Native series is made with grains that we malt here.
Wow.
And they make a lot of beer and a lot of really good beer.
Yes, they
so
do.
those are the most technical brewers in the world brewing with our grains. And it's kind of like a feather in the cap.
Oh my gosh.
It's pretty cool.
So fresh and so clean.
Like
What does that mean to you?
Like the song?
But the last part of this packaging journey, is the cleaning and freshness that really shines when you walk into this place. Cleanliness, it matched no other.
Yeah.
It was absolutely incredible. The floors were so clean, literally by the milling machine itself.
Yeah.
So they take every opportunity to clear it out, whatever they can do by the Mega Maid.
I would have eaten off that floor.
Absolutely.
No doubt. Would have been totally fine. It was so clean in there. It's like one of the first things both of us said when we walked in. And on top of the cleanliness, the freshness, right? Like what a huge piece. I hadn't even really thought about the fact that they can get grain to a brewery on their doorstep within 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like it's just so fresh, and the type of impact that makes. In the example case of fresh bread versus store-bought. Like we all know fresh tastes better, and it's showing in a premium product.
Exactly. It's a beautiful story.
When a batch finishes out of the drum,
Okay.
it empties into one of these silos on the back side here.
Okay.
So this is where the malt goes to rest until we're ready to package. Once we're ready to package, we run the malted barley through this cleaner here. And so what it is it's a series of screens and shakers and airflow through there that's pulling out some of the loose material, broken kernels, rootlets, acrospires, anything that is unwanted pretty much in the final product.
Yeah. If you're not starch, get out.
Yeah. So we send it over here to basically this is a hopper for the packaging line.
Yep.
We can mill for some of our customers don't have mills in their operation, so we do some milling for them. And then the majority of what we do is 50-pound bags out the door. Some of our larger customers, Upslope, Coors, Station 26, Prost, they all take what's called super sacks. And so these are 2,000-pound bags of malted barley.
Easy.
So instead of a 2,000-pound pallet, we're sending these. And basically that's just a labor savings for the brewery. Right? They don't have to open 40 bags to get the same. They have 16,000 pounds that they ordered. So basically a full turn out of one of the drums is what they've ordered.
A full turn, wow.
And that will be their keg beer, their packaged beer that's in distribution. So.
Wow, that's incredible. Who runs the trucks? Do you guys run that operation as well? Wow.
So what makes this operation really unique is that we're vertically integrated.
Wow.
Right? So we're sowing, we're growing it, and then we're delivering it on top of that.
Brilliant.
So Todd selects the seed, puts it in the ground, tends to the soil, runs the farm. We harvest it ourselves. We store it here on site. We clean the raw materials here. We then malt it, and we package it and deliver it as well. So there's, only a few sets of hands touching this product before it reaches the breweries. And we're doing it in a very fresh format too. So we're delivering malt that is so fresh to some of these breweries that they've never had it that fresh. Right. So if you think about purchasing grain from Europe, like Germany, it's historically where the best malt comes from in the world, right? But that malt is created in Germany in a warehouse, shipped to the port, gets on a boat, comes to the United States, sits in warehouses until it's distributed out to the breweries. So you're looking at like maybe an 8-month time span by the time that breweries get it. And, that's fresh for that. But when we're delivering malt that's a couple weeks old, there's a sensory difference in what the beers that they're creating. You have higher extract because it's fresher. It hasn't been sitting down or sitting for a long time, right? And then you just have the aromatics coming out of that in the brewing process, and everything is just, it's better. It's like fresh bread versus store-bought bread, really.
So this is the small cleaner, this is the big cleaner?
So this is the big cleaner.
Okay.
So
do they have names?
I haven't named them yet.
Oh, you should. You don't have to. I would.
We have, I'll show you when we get outside, our air handling, basically. We're collecting all the dust material from all the open points in this, and we refer to that as Mega Made. If you're a Spaceballs fan.
Yeah, I know who Mega Made is, yeah.
So this is the cleaner for the raw materials. So any of the barley or wheat or rye that come through, this is the first step of the cleaning process. So this is just a really gigantic version of that, where you have more screens, more airflow, and it's removing more material. So you think like grasshoppers, sticks, bugs, anything that's basically came out off of the field, right? When they harvested all the sticks and twigs and
where I come from, that's just silage.
Yeah.
Okay. You're cleaning, you're milling, it's setting. It's pretty clean in here.
It is pretty clean in here.
Talk to us about your air filtration. You gotta.
So we collect at every open point. We collect the dust, right? Just through. We have a giant cyclone out back that helps keep
that's
the
what
dust
you're
down.
Okay.
Right. So, and then we also work very hard to keep this place as cleanly as possible.
It's awesome.
Right. Thank you.
I think that was the first thing I noticed when we walked in. I think we were all on that point, especially Chelsea, and it was like, okay, like I can get on board with that. Like, kudos, man. Cleanliness is great.
Yep. We try to keep it very clean and very organized, right?
It's very obvious. It's very obvious.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I want to see the maid.
Well, let's go outside.
Yeah. I want to bring my roller skates through here. That's how clean it is.
Before we finish this side of the building, I used to bring my longboard and just skateboard around here.
I mean,
what else are you going to do with all that space?
yeah.
Okay. So they are stewards of the land. This is where we're at in our journey and our tour in this story. We've heard this all of our lives, but anything worth doing is worth doing right. And oftentimes that begins with a strong foundation. And when it comes to farming, that really all begins with the soil, with the land. Think about that for a minute and let it sink in. Like what you're eating, what you're drinking, like what you're breathing, think about the land the next time you sit down and you're raising a pint. Think about where those malts come from to quench your favorite beer thirst.
Okay.
Wow.
So when harvest happens, it comes directly to the malt house.
Okay.
So we're talking like this field here that is on the back side had barley on it last year.
Okay.
So when you're talking about reducing your carbon footprint, we're going like 20 yards from the field to where we're storing it to the malt house, right? So bins 7, 8, and 9 house the harvest, and that's about 3 million pounds of raw material for us, raw barley, between all three of those.
Wow.
And so bins 10 and 11 here are how we move the barley around to get it clean.
Okay.
So I'll load up 10 with the dirty barley from the field.
Okay.
It then travels through the International Space Station here and into the building.
Okay.
Through the cleaner, and then comes back out into number 11 there.
Okay.
And so then I move barley from number 11 to these 6 silos here, which is basically our operating clean barley.
Okay.
So if we're running full blast, I basically have 2 weeks worth of material to run with before I have to fire this stuff up here.
Wow.
So when you're thinking about 20,000 pounds and the drum size, and you look at this silo right here, each one of these silos is a batch. So if you think that that's filled with grain, that's what's going inside into the drum. So everything in this operation is very silo specific.
Sure.
Right? They're all equally sized, so that way we know what we're doing.
3 million pounds.
Yes.
How are you keeping up with demand?
We haven't quite hit demand on all 3 drums yet.
Okay.
We're working our way there.
Yeah.
Right. Slow process. Right now we are appropriately sized for our farm. So we are not going to grow the malting business any further because we don't have the farmland to support it. So we have to be very mindful on how much we're growing every year, crop rotation, what we're doing out in the fields, and trying to balance everything that we have. And on the farm side, we're planning 6 years in advance, right? So the malt house is a little more micro plan, but compared to the farm.
Sure.
But we have to be very mindful of where we're placing crops and not growing the same thing on the same land, because that helps. That reduces quality over time. It helps introduce diseases out into the field. So. Just trying to make quality decisions as farmers for the products that we're growing, right? So the whole idea of this operation is to provide high quality grains for the brewing and distilling industry. And so we start with the soil that we're farming with, right?
Yeah.
So we partnered a couple years ago with a company out of Boulder called Mad Ag, and they've been helping us introduce some regenerative soil practices on the farm side. So just to give you an idea, we harvested barley off of this field 2 years ago. Last year. I don't remember which one it was. I think it was last year.
It's alfalfa right now, isn't it?
It is alfalfa right now.
Yeah.
So once we harvested it, we put peas and turnips directly into the soil.
Okay.
Right? And we let them grow from the end of the summer until basically the winter. And we had 0 plans on harvesting any of that material. Well, the peas are replacing some of the nitrogen in the soil, and then the turnips are naturally decompacting the soil for us. So instead of tilling it, we're letting that naturally happen, right? So it dies out in the field, and we brought some head of cattle through and they graze, so you're creating some natural fertilizer out in the field, and they're trampling stuff down and mixing it up, getting all the nutrients back into the soil. And the idea is that when we go back into that field with barley the next go round, that we will have a higher quality harvest, right? Because we've done some work to the soil to make sure that we're not just stripping the soil of all of its nutrients, right? We're just trying to be good stewards of the land, but think long term that we have to take care of what we have because we may not have it, right? And so if we can put some practices into place now that can ensure a higher quality product down the line, we're gonna do that.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because it's very self-serving for us. But,
Absolutely.
Right?
I love the peas and the turnips. I mean, that's not dumping a bunch of chemicals back
Correct.
into it or anything
Yep.
to try and get it to be better. That never does anything.
No, and then to just take a step off of that, a couple of years ago, the price of fertilizer had skyrocketed, right? So Todd worked with another company to help develop our own fertilizer. So he's actually making his own compost on another plot of land that we're out there turning the compost every day. So some of the materials generated from this operation are then being composted by us that are then being reapplied to the land. So we're trying to do all those pieces and still keep the farm running and the malting operation going, and just trying to find ways to do things different and better. And it's a little different because during like October, you look around and we have the only fields with material on them.
Sure.
And so a lot of the farmers around us think that we're crazy.
So as our tour starts to conclude, let me take a brief moment to geek out a little bit on how cool this farm really is. Oh my God, I can't wait for you to hear this.
Yeah, I don't mean to geek out, but so far that's my favorite part.
Well,
not that the other stuff isn't really cool. Like I said, I love the process, but and it's never a dull moment, right? Like you're constantly implementing the next step. It's just like one foot in front of the other. Yeah. And it's so symbiotic because everything affects the next thing.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
It's super interesting because, we're now making, Todd's making worm tea over on the farm. So he's got these big bins that he's got worms in, and I don't even know all the things into it, but he's just trying some different things to just, do better. It's really all an experiment every day. With the companies that were on the regenerative agriculture piece, they're coming out and they're taking shovelfuls of dirt and counting worms.
Sure.
And it's really, I've been running this operation for 6 years, and 6 years ago when it rained, we never had worms on the sidewalks and stuff.
Nice.
Now when it rains, there are worms that are like this big.
Sweet.
And they are everywhere, like enough that I have to get a broom to get them off of the pavement before they dry. Like that's how different the soil has gotten around our malting facility. It's just, as an observer, it's a very interesting change that you notice over time.
Absolutely.
This never used to happen.
Where are these worms
coming
from?
And how are they so big?
Because there's a lot of good stuff in the ground. Very cool.
And then last year we had barley on site here at the malt house, which was the first time that we've ever had that.
Okay.
Which is pretty exciting because we're, it's the proximity of what we're doing.
But there's some good pictures.
So being good stewards of the land, there is a crop rotation that has to happen.
Yep.
So we go barley, corn, and then alfalfa for 4 years. So if you think about it, the land is locked up in a 6-year cycle. At least that's where we're at now. Wow. So this will maintain alfalfa for the next 3 more years, and then we'll go back into barley.
I was trying to imagine on what life cycle it's at. I don't know.
Yeah,
right?
This farm has grown a lot of things over the years, like all the way down to popcorn, just lots of things.
Yeah. Well, you can't live without popcorn. If you can, we're not friends.
So this may come as a surprise, maybe not, but they're not all about the beer there. They are also about the whiskey.
Oh, I like the whiskey.
The whiskey. And they're really digging their teeth into one of the newer styles in the whiskey market, which is going to be the single malt whiskeys.
Yeah.
Right, so a lot of places kind of shy away, or people shy away from the price of it, because the most expensive part is going to be the roasted barley on it, where they have direct access to it. And so they're like, yeah, let's just dive in on this world. And they've done pretty well already for a whiskey that's kind of like it's on the market, but not like really well talked about. Yeah. But they might have an award or two with it.
Oh,
so you'll have to chime in next week as we're gonna drop that little story on our off week of this episode, so you can learn about their whiskey that they're pumping out.
And it's so good and available in various locations.
It's delicious.
we had been talking to some distillers, and we basically struck up a deal that we would provide the distillery grain. They would distill it, store it, put it in their warehouse, sit on it for a while, and when we went to bottle it, we would create a product and we would split things 50-50. So some of that malt that we first produced from this building are now part of what is now our Root Shoot single malt whiskey.
Yeah.
Right, and so single malt has become a big deal in the whiskey world because it's the newest official style of whiskey that's being recognized.
Okay.
So it's good. There are not very many producers of single malt whiskey. So it's pretty small classification, mostly due to price of malted barley.
Okay.
So a lot of distilleries they make bourbon because bourbon's cheaper, corn is cheaper, rye is cheaper. Malted barley is the expensive portion, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's what we have. We're making malted barley.